Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Let's get started. Here are the books. Contents. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Private Drive was proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in everything strange or mysterious because they just didn't hold such a nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of film called Groenings, which made thrills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. User Madam Neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of time craning her over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no thinner boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mr. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and a good-for-nothing husband was as undudlish as it was possibly to be. The Dursleys slaughtered to think that the neighbors would say if the Potters alive the street. The Dursleys knew that Potters had a small son too, but they had never seen him. The boy was another good for reason for keeping the Potters away, and they didn't want Dursley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the great Tuesday out our story starts, there was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange, mysterious things would be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled screaming Dursley onto a high chair. None of them noticed a large tawny oar fluttered past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked in Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed. But because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at Orr's little take short Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4 Drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar, a cat reading map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Private Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the right. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back as Mr. Dursley drove up around the corner and up the road. He watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign of the said Private Drive. No, looking at the sign, cats couldn't read maps or sign. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat on his mind. Out of his mind. As he drove towards the town, he thought of nothing except a large order of his drills was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of the town, drills were down off his mind by something else. As he sat on the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there were seen to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes, the get-ups you saw on the young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion, but he drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on Hutter and these widows standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was the man that enraged to see the couple of them, and young tell why that man had to be older than he was and wearing an emerald green clock. The nerve of him! But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on. A few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in a Gronin's car park. His mind back on rails. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the ninth floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on the drills that morning. He didn't see the hours swooping past in the broad daylight, though people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed at the hour after hour sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an hour after even at nighttime. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal hour-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in very good mood lunchtime when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite. He'd forgotten all about the people clocks until he passed up a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. These lot were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past them and clutching a large donut in a bag that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters, that's right, that's what I heard. Yes, their son, Harry. The Mrs. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whispers and he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hired up in his office, and slept back to the secretary not to disturb him. Seized off his telephone, and he had almost finished dialing his home number, and when he changed his mind, he put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an even unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even the sure nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point of worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he had a sister like that, but are the same those people in clocks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon, and when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still no worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, and the tiny old man just stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet coat. He didn't seem at all upset being almost knocked about the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide, small smile, and he said a squeaky voice that made passers-by stare. Don't worry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy day. And the man hugged Mr. Dudley around the mirror and walked up. Mr. Dudley looked at to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was startled. He hurried into the car and set off home, hoping that he was imagining things which he had never hoped before, but because he didn't approve of the imagination. As he poured the driveway of the number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he spotted that morning. It was now sitting in the garden wall. He was sure that it was the same one, and it had the same markings around its eyes. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dudley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a startled look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dudley wondered, trying to pull himself together. He let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mr. Dudley had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner. Mrs. Dudley had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word, shan't. Mr. Dudley tried to act normally. When Dudley hadn't been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report and the evening news. And finally, birdwatchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The news reader allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious, and now over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? "Well, Ted," said the weatherman, "I don't know what about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain promised yesterday, they have been a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire, not easily. It's not until next week, folks. But I can promise a wet night tonight." Mr. Dudley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over the Britain, owls flying by daylight, mysterious people in the clocks all over the place, and whisper about the Potters. Mr. Dudley came inside the living room and carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He had to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Bettina, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you?" As he had expected, Mrs. Dudley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. "No," she said sharply. "Why?" "Funny stuff on the news," Mr. Dudley remembered. "Oh, shooting stars, and there were a lot of funny looking old people down today. So, snapped Mr. Dudley. "Well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with, But Mr. Dudley sipped on tea though the pursed lips. Mr. Dudley wondered whether he dared to tell he'd heard the name Potter, and he decided that he didn't dare. Instead, he said, and casually as he could, "Their son, he'd be about Dudley's age now, won't he?" So we're gonna read until page 7, and next video we're gonna read so bye bye. 10-minute Harry Potter.